that may not be obvious, He is there. We can see the Lord in every book of the Bible. One book that is such, where it's not very obvious, is the book of Esther. God is not mentioned by name, but you can see Him orchestrating His will the entire way through the book. We won't see His name, but we will see His hand. We'll read tonight, we'll read the account of Esther as a story, as a narrative, stopping only to comment on God's involvement in the affairs of mankind. Although this is an actual historical account that we will see in the book, that this was in the history books of the Medes and Persians. This is real, ancient history, what we're about to read. And interestingly enough, as we said, you won't see the name of God, but wow, can you see the hand of God. And we'll understand as we go through this narrative tonight that God had a purpose and a plan and a will all along. And His plan that the Savior of the world, the Messiah, the Christ, would come through the line of the Jewish people would be preserved as God orchestrates through this historical account of the book of Esther. Tonight we're going to look at this idea when God seems silent. When God seems silent. There may come an occasion in our lives where we may be going through something that seems horrible, disastrous, something that if we got the choice, we would not choose for ourselves or our family. And there are times in those circumstances that it may seem as though God is silent or unaware. We can rest assured that He is never unaware. We can rest assured that He is in fact working His will out through people. Sometimes people are completely unaware that God is working through them, as we'll see in this account in Esther. Now, probably if you've been around church much, you've read this account, you might have seen a movie on it, you may know basically what's going on here. But I want us tonight, as we read this narrative, it starts off in the first chapter. All the first chapter and the first couple verses in chapter 2 are really a historical narrative of something that happened in this land here in Shushan, in Persia. And then we begin to see, beginning in chapter 2, how God has put people in place to make sure that His will is carried out. It's the big picture of God, the redemption story of man being preserved in this small book with no mention of God by name, but great evidence of God by situation. So let's look at it tonight. The book of Esther, again, we're going to just read this. So follow along, and we'll make comment here or there, but the book of Esther. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he shewed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, a half a year, this feast took place. Verse 5, and when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver. upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being divers one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to a king Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass. How do you like that name, Carcass? The 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to shew the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So old, drunk King Ahasuerus said, I have a great idea. Let's bring my beautiful queen in for everybody to look at and just see the trophy that I have in a queen. That was his good idea. Verse 12. But the queen Vashti refused to come to the king's commandment, to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment, and the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat at the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to law? Because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. When it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. So in other words, they said, the other ladies in the kingdom are going to get word that Vashti stood up to the king, and so everybody, all the other women will stand up to their husbands too. We can't let this happen. So verse 19, here's their conclusion. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Important part of history here, because this now has put the queen, Vashti, in a poor light in the eyes of the king. And he's not happy with her. And a law has gone out to all the kingdom, India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, people of all kinds of languages, that women should obey their husbands in their homes. And so now what would he do with Vashti? Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. And let their things for purification, or beauty treatments, be given them. And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. So they're going to gather up all the beautiful virgins in the land, bring them in, and we're going to find out for a year, give them beauty treatments, teach them how to be a queen. And then the king will interview, get to know each of these women, and choose whichever one he likes the best and make her queen. Here's where it starts to turn, though, verse 5, where we see God's plan beginning to unfold. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for purification, such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her, out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Important note here in verse 10, Esther had not shewed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. She did not tell the people there that she was a Jew. They were hiding that because many of the Jews were mistreated. So they were hiding the fact that she was a Jew. Verse 11, and Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden to the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her, to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashagaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus, into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. You see God moving here. God has now placed one of his people in a prominent place in world leadership, and it's for a purpose, as we'll see. And as he has now made her queen, verse 18, the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet shewed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlain, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. We have an assassination attempt here. These two men want to kill the king. Verse 22, and the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Notice that. Mordecai foils an assassination plot on King Ahasuerus, and it's written down in a book. These events were written down in a book. That'll come up later. And you see how God put Mordecai right in the spot to where he got the news of the assassination attempt on a King Ahasuerus. And he told Esther, and Esther told the king, and gave Mordecai credit for it. Don't forget that. And the plot was foiled. And those two men who were going to try to assassinate the king were hanged. Now that seems like a nice deed for Mordecai, but it's going to be way more than that in the future. It's going to be something that spares the people of God. This is great. We don't see his name. We don't see God's name. But boy, do we see him moving throughout. This is history. And God is going to preserve the line of the Messiah. Chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman. Haman's going to be a bad guy. Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. In other words, he's the vice king, if you will. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. Watch this. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. He would not bow before this man. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman, to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew, and the plot thickens. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shewed him the people of Mordecai. It wasn't just enough to kill Mordecai. Watch this, middle of verse 6. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Haman said, it's not enough that this lowly Jew would die because he won't bow down to me. No, that's not enough. I'm going to wipe out every Jew on the face of this earth. He was so angry, he didn't just want to make an example of Mordecai. He wanted to eradicate all of the Jews. Verse 7, in the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. He said, King, there's this group of people, this other race in your provinces, and they have weird laws, and they don't keep your laws. And so it would do you good just to get rid of every one of them. Verse 9, if it please the king, let it be written, that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. He gave him his ring, that's like his signature. And he said, you make a law, however you want to make it, according to the money and these people. Whatever you decide is fine with me. Verse 12, then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people in every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Why does the king want to kill all of these people? When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate. For none might enter into the king's gate clothed with the sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai into the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to shew it unto Esther, and declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hathach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king for these 30 days. So there's a law in Persia that no one was welcome into the king's inner court, into his throne room, unless he invited them. And if someone came into the king's throne room uninvited, they would be killed, unless the king held out his golden scepter. And when he held out his golden scepter, what he was saying was, you are invited to come to the throne. And so she says, he's banned everybody for 30 days. I can't go in there or I'll die. That's what she sends to Mordecai. And verse 12, and they told to Mordecai Esther's words. And then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape into the king's house more than all the Jews. In other words, he says, listen, you're not off the hook here either. If he's going to kill all the Jews, Esther, he's going to kill all the Jews, including you. In other words, you have nothing to lose. You have only your life to gain by going in there. You're going to die either way. Maybe. And here's what he says in verse 14. This is a fantastic verse in the Word of God. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, Then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He says, Esther, if you don't go in there on behalf of the Jews, someone else will. God will see to it that his people are taken care of. Now, he doesn't say the name of God. But what he's implying here is that the Jewish race will never be eradicated because they are God's people. He said, so whether it's you or somebody else, God's going to get done what he needs to get done. He continues on verse 14, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. But you, for your sake, you'll be wiped out at not taking this opportunity. I love this. He says, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Perhaps, Esther, it could just be that you are put in the king's palace as the queen just for this purpose. Just to go in on the behalf of your people and plead your case. He doesn't say the name of God, but oh, don't we see that Mordecai is seeing with the eyes of faith, and he understands that God has placed his dear niece there in the palace of Persia, of all places, to be with the king just for this time. Perhaps God chose her to be the one to spare the people. As we see that, there's an obvious teaching. Perhaps God has placed us in 2017 in the middle of this sorry American culture for such a time as this. It didn't take God by surprise that our culture would be the way it is right now. He knew what was coming. And is it that he put us here just for this time? He put us here so that we would be the ones to take the gospel to the world, to our neighbors, to our communities. Did God put us here for such a time as this? Well, he doesn't make any mistakes. He could have put anybody here, but you know what? He put us here. And just like Esther, we have a holy duty. We need to take care of God's business. Will we? Well, let's see what Esther does, verse 15. Then Esther bade them return to Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. I love it. If that's what it takes, I'm going. She calls upon all the Jews to fast and pray for her. Verse 17, so Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. So this is the moment. She walks into the throne room. Will she be killed, or will she be extended the golden scepter? Verse 2, and it was so when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. In other words, saying, I receive your invitation. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given to thee to the half of the kingdom. Boy, he loved her. And he said, whatever you want, I'll give it to you up to the half of my kingdom. Wow, did God put a love in his heart for this woman? It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an accident. God had given Ahasuerus this deep love for Esther to give her whatever she would ask. We don't see his name, but we see his hand. And so he asked her, what's your request? She says in verse 4, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto a banquet that I have prepared for him. And the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. That's nice of her. She made a lunch for him. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do it, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Then went Haman forth. So in other words, she says, come back tomorrow and I'm going to make a better lunch. Just you two, though. King, just you and Haman. I want to honor you with a lunch. So how does Haman feel about that? Verse 9. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and to Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow I'm invited unto her also with the king. He's bragging about how him and the king are tight, and he gets to have lunch with the king and Esther. Verse 13, Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all of his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, 75 feet high. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. 75-foot high hanging gallows right in his front yard. On that night could not the king sleep. We don't see his name, but we see his hand. God's working. On that night could not the king sleep. And he commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles. And they were read before the king. Remember what was written in a book? And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? They read the account of when Mordecai saved the king's life. And the king said, What do we do? How do we reward Mordecai? Then said the king's servants, middle of three, that ministered unto him, There is nothing done for him. And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house, to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Early in the morning, the king had just realized that they didn't do anything to reward Mordecai. He said, Who's that out there in the court? And they said, Haman's out there. He said, Bring him in. Now Haman was there to tell the king to hang Mordecai. This is great. I love this. So Haman, verse 6, So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? So the king says to Haman, I need some advice. I'm really wanting to honor somebody. There's this guy that I want to show great honor to. In your opinion, what should I do? This is great. He says, it says in middle of 6, Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to honor more than to myself? Well, there's nobody else the king would rather honor than me. So what do I want? Verse 7, And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought with the king, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal, which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. It's a pretty good plan, and Haman's already seeing himself in the king's robe, and the king's crown, on the king's horse, and everybody bowing down to Haman. He can see it in his mind. Great idea. Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Could you see his face drop? He's got a big smile on his face, waiting for the king to say, this is you, go get on the horse. And he says, do this to Mordecai. I mean, he wanted the guy dead. In fact, he wanted him dead by the end of the day. But the king said, no, I want you to put the robe on him. I want you to put the crown on his head. I want you to put him on my horse and parade him through the town. Wow. That's not good for Haman. Verse 11. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on the horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth. You can almost hear him pouting. Verse 12, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all of his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. It's lunchtime, Haman. This is going to get worse for him. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted to thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. She says, don't have me killed. Don't have my people killed. And you can almost see the king's brow furrowing as he thinks, what are you talking about? And she goes on, verse 4, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? And where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? Who is this guy that wants to kill you and your people? She points across the table. Maybe Haman was eating a big turkey leg and had the juice running down his face. She points and said, verse 6, the adversary and enemy, that is wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed where Esther was. Whoops. The king was begging for, or Haman was begging for his life, and you can see him, please, Esther, don't let him hurt me. And he falls down on the bed as he begs, and right in that moment, the king walks in. That's a bad scene, isn't it? Bad, bad, bad scene. Then the king returned out of the palace garden, and then said the king as he saw this, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face, bag over his head. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Time would fail us to continue, but as it goes, Mordecai received great honor. He became the vice king. God's people were spared because the initial law that was written, it had to be held up. But there was another law that was written that said the Jews are allowed to defend themselves on that day. And boy, did they. They killed over 75,000 people who tried to murder them. They eradicated the enemies of God. You say, boy, Esther was an awesome lady. She was a good woman. But like the choir sang, how great is our God. He wasn't going to let his will be foiled by some guy named Haman. You know what that tells me? It doesn't matter who has it out for me or who wants to stand in the way of God's will. His will be done. Whatever he has decreed, it will come to pass. Even when it seems like he's silent or not there, he's working and he's aware. May we gain great faith and encouragement as we leave tonight, knowing our God is always working. Shall we pray? Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for this great account of, although your name is never mentioned one time, your power is seen throughout. It just humbles us, Lord, as we consider your greatness, the ability to maneuver mankind as they carry out your will. There was nothing was going to stop Jesus Christ coming to this earth. Many had tried. This was just another attempt. And every one of them failed because you are great and mighty. We thank you for the Lord Jesus Christ. We thank you for the salvation that he gives to all who call upon his name. And God, as we exit this place, would you please increase our faith? Would you please, God, encourage our hearts in those moments when it seems that you're not there, that we're on our own, and that your plans may fail. Lord, help us to know they never will. You're always there, and you're always working, even when we can't see it. We ask these things in Jesus' name.